Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
It's The In Show, Australia's only show dedicated to innovation from Adelaide, Australia, and across the globe.
It's David Grice and Troy Sincock. We're all about innovation on the In Show podcast, and we did it in front of a live audience for the very first time.
Yes, have you ever done it in front of a live audience before?
I've interviewed people in front of an audience before, but I've never actually done like a self-contained show. I suppose I've been involved with outside broadcasts and that kind of thing, but this was a completely different setting. It was almost like going to see the theatre in some respects.
It kind of was, and it was really interesting to see all of the other podcasters that were actually there. You know, some really amazing stories.
Yeah, that guy with the flute and the guy with the sunglasses. There was the girl that interviewed the mermaid. There was a guy that talked about, battling cancer. There was all sorts of stuff from, really serious stuff to hilarious content.
Yeah, and some of it just so out there that you just wonder what the heck made them think about what they were doing.
Now, if you want to check out more of the In-Show content, subscribe to our new feed in Apple Podcasts to keep listening to the In-Show podcast. Just resubscribe to the In-Show with the coloured logo. Now, here we go with our live debut performance at the Adelaide Podcast Festival. This is the In-Show Live.
Now, look, we're happy to announce tonight that we're actually in 45 countries. We're in episode number 35. And those countries will be obviously tuning into what we're doing right now, which is our first ever live broadcast. And I guess it's really worth shouting out to a few of those countries. And there's no particular order here, but we've got listeners in Canada, Croatia, Egypt, France, Germany, Israel, Japan, Nigeria, over the Dutch in New Zealand, Russia, Seychelles. Has anyone heard of that as a country, by the way? Yeah, so who on earth would have thought that innovation was being important in Seychelles, but they're there. United States is actually the biggest country in the world listening to us right now, especially our friends in San Francisco. And we have another one called Yemen that's on our radar as well. And that's just a few of them.
Yeah, it shows that innovation really is a global thing. And what we've discovered when talking to startups and entrepreneurs and innovators, that it's actually not been so much about the technology that they've been part of, but more about the stories and their dedication and their commitment and the sacrifice that it's taken for them to really make a stand for others to help make the world a better place. It's been incredible, some of the stories that we've had come out of the show, David.
I mean, when we started this, we started with the idea of building a community around innovation. So we wanted to find people with great ideas and help them find people around the world that would help them make those ideas real. But when we started to talk to people, and we found these people just coming out of the woodwork. When the Space Convention was here last year, this guy came to us out of the blue, did a Google search on innovation media in South Australia, and we came up, and we spoke to this guy who was an Israeli fighter pilot, and he shared with us not about the satellites that he was building, but about his life, where this was all about how he had to wake up every single morning and know that he was going to cause human devastation by flying these fighter planes into these, war-torn areas. He left the Israeli army or the Israeli Air Force and told us then that he was scared of bungee jumping. He could go 9 Gs in a fighter plane, but he couldn't do bungee jumping. So hearing those kinds of stories, and then within that, we probably spent a couple of minutes on actually why he came to talk to us, which is about his satellites.
And if I remember rightly, he was wasn't he involved with NASA with the space shuttle that crashed and the people on board died? He was involved in that as well. He
was on the ground, and he was the guy that actually had to go and talk to the families after the devastation of that. So being able to openly share those stories for us was just absolutely mind-blowing. And another one that comes to mind is late last year we had an aerospace engineer from NASA here, and he was here to talk to the Uni Adelaide's Think Lab. But we found out his story was he grew up in his father's building company, so he became a builder and then decided he really liked landscaping. So then what he did was he thought he'd start a lawn mowing round. Before he knew it, within the first 12 months, he had 35 employees, a $1.3 million business. But what he was passionate about was fixing the lawnmowers because nobody could fix them for him. So then he did an engineering degree, mechanical engineering, And while he was in the university doing those studies, it was a community college, by the way, which is kind of interesting. But then while he was doing that, he actually had the opportunity to work on a project that was sending cancer cells into space. And that happened to be with NASA. And then within 6 months, he was employed by NASA, and he's now an aerospace engineer.
It kind of gives everyone hope, going from repairing lawnmowers to working for NASA within a matter of years.
Well, I'm a carpenter by trade, so surely there's some hope for me.
You've got a big future ahead of you. What about that Japanese teacher that made that robot that looked exactly like him?
Yeah, so he cloned himself. He made a robot of himself, put artificial intelligence behind it, and then he's a professor at a university and used the robot to actually give the lectures. And because there's AI behind his robot, someone would ask him the questions, and knowing that it was a robot, and the answers that would come back would be absolutely perfect. They'd be right. And then there's an eye drop guy. This guy who's wearing glasses in the room. I know Troy's, been complaining about eyesight for a long time. But this guy's got an eye drop that restores the youthful elasticity in the eye, which then means that nobody's going to need glasses ever again. So these are the kind of guys that we've been, people that we've been able to get their stories out of.
Yeah, it's been a great experience doing this podcast. Obviously, I work in radio, but there's been something about the freedom of this podcast and working outside the format of the radio station that I work for that's just had me see this whole other world and how extraordinary people actually are, how big people are and what they're really up to. What we're discovering that with the advances in technology, it really is kind of the human skills that are coming to the fore, communication, partnerships and ultimately connection. And that's what tonight's guest is all about. With a background in farming, Leanne Isaacson now considers herself a digital farmer. In fact, the sale of her farm settled today. Australia's most connected LinkedIn woman, Leanne is a connection creator. Please welcome Leanne to the show and the Adelaide Podcast Festival.
Thank you, Troy. Thank you, David.
So, Leanne, we've had a lot of fun talking about your stories. So you've gone from a farm. We had a couple of emus as pets roving around in your backyard.
Yeah, I did actually, yeah.
But now you're connecting with people globally. How the hell did that happen?
I don't really know. I don't know actually. I've always been a connector and a networker and a relationship builder. So it's just something that comes naturally. And I went on to LinkedIn, 2007, in October 2007, so 10 years ago. And I just sort of fiddled around with it for a while and sort of started building my network in 2012. I learned a bit more about it and yeah, it's just been something that's just been a gradual thing. So I actually added up today, I've got 31,402 connections.
Holy moly.
Now tell me about your ideas around connection, because some people think, particularly when they're in business and that kind of thing, they go out and they go to all these networking functions. You kind of see networking and connection as different, right?
Yeah, I do. I suppose networking, they're certainly connected, but for me, connections is actually building relationships with people. And I know that, especially with my LinkedIn network, a lot of people have said to me, well, you can't possibly know that many people. And look, no, I don't, absolutely. But for me, it's like a virtual handshake. Like I don't walk into a room and not shake hands with someone just because you don't know them. But it's actually then about, building a connection and a relationship and finding the things that press their buttons and, commonalities and, that's how you find out stories and that's how you find skills and knowledge and, how you can learn.
I think a lot of people will ask, what the heck do you do with all of this? Is this something that is just, it's there for fun, or are you doing something with that?
Generally what I have, for a long time I actually didn't tell anyone that I had so many connections because, for a couple of reasons. I was a bit scared that I would have 30,000 people messaging me every day. So potentially that could happen. So for a long time I actually didn't tell anyone. It was part of my learning, and I was learning about the platform. And but what I tend to do now is actually I make connections for other people. So, someone said to me once, can you find me a lawyer in London that specialises in media entertainment law? This guy was in Colorado. So I said, yeah, sure. So, I did some searches and I found a particular lady that I knew that fitted, exactly what he needed. So I contacted her and put the two of them together. So I tend to, join the dots for people.
And what is at the source of you wanting to connect people?
I think it's, like we all have knowledge and we all have skills, and for me, I just naturally, see where the pieces fit together. So it's about helping people solve problems, or vice versa, finding what they need.
How interesting is this, that somebody who is a farmer has so many LinkedIn connections in the first place? Because you think that would be something reserved for those people that have, got some sort of profile in the world and that sort of thing. A humble farmer has got all these people, but how do you filter this out? Like, is there a mechanism that you have in place that, enables you to fit these people together in some way?
I probably never discount a connection. Look, realistically, would I have some fake profiles in my network? Absolutely. They don't cause me any harm. If they do, there's always a disconnect button. But you just never know who someone else knows.
That's why you disconnected me.
Yeah, sorry.
Bugger.
I did. Sorry.
You wouldn't be
about
the first person, Leanne, just out of
that.
interest.
Sorry. So I think it's really, it's just you sort of get to know, who's. I suppose it's about the relationships again.
Mm-hmm. I remember you telling me a story that was never featured on the podcast when we spoke to you about your son and the environment that he was working in and how that had you really see how some people are living. Can you tell us about that?
Oh, I think it's my son works for Melbourne over in Melbourne for a corporate valuation firm, and it's such a cutthroat corporate environment. And for me, it's actually about developing relationships. I've got a friend of mine who's worked in an organisation, a corporate organisation for, 7 years, and he doesn't know the name of his boss's wife or kids. And you think, how can you actually work in that sort of an environment and not know that? So for me, it's always is the personal connection. And that's, I think that's where LinkedIn, for me, has been, building the relationships with people.
You talked about being a digital farmer. Can you just explain what the digital farmer is? You talked about the seed and how that. Yeah.
Well, it was when our farm sold. Well, it's actually settled today, so it's a bit of a bittersweet day. Anyway, I'm driving away from the farm for the really last time was interesting, but for me. You build relationships. It's like planting a seed. You plant it in the ground, and if you nurture it, you give it water, you give it sunlight, that it's going to grow. But some seeds grow faster than others, and sometimes something might come bear fruit within 6 months. Some might take 10 years. But you just never know. And so a lot of the digital farming stuff is just. Someone said it to me once, because I said, well, what am I? I'm a farmer without a farm. And he said, you're a digital farmer. This is what you do.
Well, you're much more than that. You're the first guest we've ever had at a live podcast. So please thank Leanne Isaacson for joining us. Australia's most connected guys. LinkedIn woman. Well, that was the In-Show Live at the Adelaide Podcast Festival. David, how was that experience for you?
Oh, look, I had an absolute ball, and fought back my nerves pretty well, I thought, and in the end, it was really good to be able to actually look at some attractive people for us.
And we got another vote for the Australian Podcast Awards as well.
Yeah, we went up 50%. Thank goodness for that.
Now, on the next In-Show podcast, we're going to find out what's in.
Yeah, we're talking to Ben Flink. He's part of the innovation team at the RAA, the Royal Automobile Association for South Australia, and he's talking about the changes in our society that have come about with the advent of new technologies.
Fantastic. They're doing a lot in the innovation space.
They really are. And, to think of an organisation with so many staff and such a rich, full history, to know that they're continually trying to reinvent and re-evolve is just unbelievable.
Yeah, really exciting stuff. We'll find out more about that on the next In-Show podcast.
The In-Show Interview. Subscribe to the In-Show podcast on iTunes. A Dave and the Beanstalk production.
Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.